Hello everyone. In this chapter, we're going to discuss about the testing and the installation of programming language. This is, as you know, chapter 7 in our course INFS309. All right, so we will be starting with the outline of that chapter. We will be, by the end of the chapter, you should be able to understand and well reason these following points. Understanding the need of programming languages also, and understanding the different database management systems that are available. Also, some kind of installation tips, though this is actually the part where we are going to discuss it. On the during the lab time, and also you should be able to understand and will have a well knowledge about the web-based programming language also, or how to program database. So all right, so the first point here, it actually discusses the need. Why do we need actually programming language? Why are they called so important here? It is because we have the so-called two types of web pages here that are available. Because you see in the current evolution and the technology of web development, we have a lot of interactions between the user, the end user, and the websites here. So this means actually we are moving from having a static web pages here into what I call a dynamic web page. So whenever you talk about whenever we talk or whenever we involve or describe kind of a dynamic web page here, surely we are actually considering a particular programming language that is actually connected to a database, because this will even bring more interaction with the user. So a programming language also can also be used to update databases. Of course, this should be linked with the database, as I was mentioning in a while, and it should also communicate with other systems. All right, so this is actually the programming language and the databases are actually accumulatively defining what does it mean by what do we mean by dynamic pages or dynamic web pages. All right, so under programming languages, there are some applications here, but like within the scope of this course, it defines two kind of applications here. The first one is called e-commerce environment, which allows visitors, of course, to build and handle these kind of websites that has a shopping, online shopping, which allows the user to customize a lot of, to select between a lot of options and customize his selection according to the available criteria. All right, so the user should be able to highly interact with that website. So this is actually a very good example of of a dynamic web page where programming should be integrated a lot. So it is regarding infrastructure and management that might be connected. And also, for example, here we have, under e-commerce environment, one of the examples here is Microsoft Commerce Server. As you know, and you have been discussing this, and we have been discussing this previously, it allows companies, different companies, or even users to create their e-commerce sites, and they do not even need to have a very high skill of programming, because Microsoft is actually bringing every single function here as to be like a plug and play. So all you need to do is just drag it, or simply you can only integrate it using a very user-friendly interface there. Okay, so this is actually a very good type of commerce application. The other one is called the those kind of applications that are actually meant to automate the business process, such as order processing. For example, when you're actually ordering something, or as a client or as a merchant, you're actually ordering one item from from a particular server or from a particular company. So this is actually also another kind of another kind of programming. But how is this different from the above is that the second one here, it automates the business process, meaning that we don't the user or the human doesn't need to interact. The programmer, he himself, the owner of that of that business, he doesn't need to interact or administer that, while just leaving this into the to the fully automated system and fully sophisticated system. So this one here we're talking about a high sophistication of programming languages that actually enables us enables us to do, enable the, like the software or like that process to be highly automated without the help and the assistance from the human. So companies typically control their central networks and can especially define the entire programming environment. All right, so here we talk about database management system, and I think and I believe that in this kind of trivial term, it's already simple to know and hear about, even like especially those who have been studying the database database management system, or like web design. So it is about storing data in an organized manner. So these data are being stored and processed using a language called SQL here. So SQL is actually just, it is the main and the mother language that provide instruction in order to handle and interact with the database. So here we have actually different kind of databases available. Like for example here, MySQL. This is kind of a free database management system that it's widely used for web systems. Also there is Oracle, but Oracle here it's actually costly. But here when we talk about MySQL, it's actually a free version of that. MySQL, to know that, and we will be discussing this in in an advanced chapter and in the advanced sections within this chapter. It is meant to be used with Apache, and that's why it is actually the main database that is used for the Linux systems. So most databases are relational. So what do we mean by relational here? As you can see, so it means that tables are actually grouped into databases, and these tables are actually share the common, have a data or items that have a common characteristics. See, for example, here, so like for example, first name, last name, and department number and salary. So these are all elements, columns, that they have actually a kind of similar characteristics, and they have been identified by SSN. All right. So here, we have two definitions here, like the primary and the foreign keys here. So here, primary key, of course, something that you already know. A primary key is something that can identify the whole record of that. So the record here, it's one row. So each row here, it's called a record of data. So primary key here, it is the unique piece of information that we can use it to identify which user is actually, which profile of a user that can be extracted. For example, here, if I want to get like the details of Lane, I can call her record or her information using her SSN. All right, so this is kind of a unique kind of data. For a foreign key here, it's something, it is just an extra information or kind of an extra details that happens to be separated in another table, but these, this table is linking to the main table using, kind of an identity here. So department number here, like it can be like each employee here should be affiliated to only one department. So it can, we can link this department number in the main table, and we call it here as a foreign table. But here in its table, it's called as a primary key. But when it's existed here, actually this arrow should be pointing here, not here. Maybe this is just kind of a mistake. But anyway, so here we are still actually linking to the same, looking into the same item here, which is the department number. So department number, when it is existed in the table and in the employee table, okay, so we call it as a foreign key. Foreign key based on what? Based on another table that it has been created on, and here it acts as a primary key to say. All right, so we have a concept here called normalization. And normalization here, it's a series of rules that organizes the data, meaning that, so how to, when different items are being grouped in one table, so we call them, they should have, they should have a related information and related relationships to each other, so we can normalize these tables. So normalization can be occurred over the data that has a relation with the primary key, not a relation among each other. Going back again here, so here, so Len has no relation to Gwynny, Or like for example, Lynn has no relation to 10, but it has a relation to its ID, meaning that we cannot define Lynn by the last name, or we cannot define this column by, for example, this column, or we cannot define this column by maybe salary, for example, because salary might be similar here. But each of these items might be, I mean, like can be identified by the primary key. So that's why here we can normalize these kind of data. These data that may have a relation to each other, but they cannot define by one another, but can be defined by only the primary key. All right. So actually, you can find more information about this in the textbook. This is just a summarization points of what is normalization concept is about. Under categories of SQL here, we have three categories there. So the first one is related to the programming and inserting, updating whatever queries are available, and we call this as DML, or data manipulation, because manipulate is something to modify or something to work on. That's why we have it named as manipulation. Data definition language here, it's another category of SQL that that it's used to create tables and other related structures in a database. So they're somehow, I mean, like near to each other, but like this one is related to processing. I mean, like to the actual actions, but here it is about like the high level, a little bit of high level DDL. Okay. And finally, we have the data control. Of course, this is sounds kind of distinguished, which allows you to handle all the control details and the control affairs of the tables. All right, so talking about Microsoft Access here, it is another form of database management system. We were discussing just now about MySQL and SQL to say, so it is another, I mean, like Microsoft Access here, it's actually another type of database management system, but it's called a file-based. Why? It is because each data is stored in a single file rather than being stored in a table, okay, or can be retrieved in like I mean like a piece of information, okay. So meaning that like as we have a standalone file, so we can move each file separately, meaning that you can move the entire table in a file and can move it from one place to another. It is actually simple. It is straightforward, user-friendly, and it has a good user interface. So which means that it can allow those kind of beginner users to the database to easily interact with it and learn database and manipulate databases. However, it is not designed for, large database, that kind of large databases, because actually it doesn't has any, I mean like doesn't integrate much of sophistication and normalization, I mean like, and all these kind of concepts that make databases to work dynamically. All right. So this is actually one of the limitation here, and also another one here, it doesn't provide security, and this is also, I mean, this is actually one of the main and the current challenges in the now, I mean like in the recent kind of databases, especially when you are linking the database to an online server. I mean like that you need to have these kind of sensitive data to be stored in that kind of server. All right. So with that, so now we are moving to the installation of the server. Actually, there is nothing much to talk here about. It's just like a simple steps, because I will actually explain to you the, I mean, like during the lab tutorial, the more details and even more effective details regarding this. So we will just, I mean, like through this slide, we will just have roughly, those kind of considerations to consider, I mean, like for the installation. However, they are not the whole details. So as with the other applications, so of course, SQL is being installed using a wizard meaning that like it's a user graphical interface that instructs you to go next. I mean, by clicking on a buttons and showing you a very informative kind of details. All right, so by default, it uses the username, I mean, like the username of the operating system as the account. I mean, like the login to access the, I mean, like the database. So it should be changed, of course, using the local system account for single server systems. And if the SQL server need to communicate with another server, of course, I mean, like it has to have a domain. It has to be registered with a domain. I mean, like the DHCP and DNS. So of course, you need to have a domain that gathers, I mean, the different kind of networks in it. So here, authentication modes. In order to log in and access the SQL server, we have two types of authentication here. One is related to Windows. We call it Windows authentication mode, and then the other one is called mixed mode. So Windows Authentication Mode, of course, it's been invented and developed by Windows, and it controls the access to database on Windows users only, not actually compatible with the other kind of users, for example, Macintosh or Linux. The mixed mode here, it is actually the Windows Server. It is Windows and server authentication, so it allows SQL Server authentication. I mean, like within like the host. I mean, like the user, the end user, and then the server itself. So this is more appropriate for web-based systems because we have a client and a server, and they need to be authenticated to each other. But here in the first one, it is as I believe it is limited to the server side. Okay. Um, Here again, here SA, which is the system administrator account, here it's the main account that has the complete control over the database. And of course, this is actually a very trivial kind of definition, being the administrator. All right. So in SQL here, you may have a kind of that, I mean, like of a user-friendly database. And you need to know this. Actually, SQL can be manipulated or can be used either, I mean, like in both ways, either wizard or from a command line. Wizard meaning that you have a kind of I mean, like a graphical user interface like this. It is like an Excel-like interface, and you can actually insert data on it, or you can simply use the command line and I mean, like insert the commands like in as an instructions here. As we can see here, we can actually type, even we can key in the data without having, I mean, like without the need to give an instruction. It's just only keying in the real values, I mean, the actual values of the data. Um, so talking about Linux here, as we have said before in the beginning of the slide, so Linux web server uses, of course, MySQL instead of SQL, and this is a very important point, and you need to focus on it here. So it uses MySQL rather than SQL server to perform database operations. So MySQL here, of course, it doesn't require, actually it requires post configuration to enable it using Apache server. Actually here it doesn't require post configuration. Let me just fix this kind of error. Here it does not require, because actually it comes, why I'm saying this, it's because it comes as a built-in function with the Apache server. So whenever you install Apache, MySQL is there. So all you need to do is just simply start using that by linking the database through, I mean, like linking the database to whatever programming language you are using. So it uses an application called MySQL Monitor. This actually kind of application provides a user graphical interface that allow the user to interact, I mean, like without having the, I mean, like the need to write in command line. But I'm telling you the experience actually. If I mean, like and normally most of the, I mean, like most of the databases, it is much better for us to interact with the database using the command line. Why? It's because by having that, I mean, like that ability of interaction, we are actually will be able to know every single details, and we can know that, I mean, like the deep level of details on how can we retrieve data from database, and we even can be able to, if there's any issue or if there's any error in the output that we are retrieving and processing data in the database, we can easily detect it because we are working in a command level. But if you're working in a GUI, so you may not have the ability to identify any kind of possible error. So that's why I really recommend you to work in a command line, though it seems kind of difficult and a little bit complicated in the beginning, especially for those who are beginners to the database. But bit by bit, it will be actually more easier for you. All right, so by default, it's installed without password, as we can see. I mean, like as you can read here, so you don't need to have a password to log in, but you can do so if you want to have a login, I mean, like function. So it uses SQL command, of course, because MySQL, it's actually inherited from the SQL. So it manipulates the, I mean, like it inherits the same SQL commands here, but of course, having SQL, I mean, like having them in an environment which is little, I mean, like which is freely used and can be easily manipulated. Okay, so there are actually some terms here that we can define within the programming environment, some concepts that we need to be aware of. For example, I mean, like we need to know that I mean, like the programming environment, the web-based programming environment, it is based on the process model or the model that it's called input process output. And I think this is even very trivial kind of model, you can understand it from its name, as you can as the names reads here. So when the web server receives the request, so it means that it inputs it. For dynamic web page, it receives an input from the user. So it receives, meaning that it actually gets, I mean, like it reads and provides an input from a user browser. So it processes that information and then produces it to the output. This is actually, I think, very easy and straightforward. It just happened to be gathered and wrapped in one model, and this is the model. And typically, this is actually the model that translates the communication between the client and the server. So it is input, process, output, of course. So a user feeds in information to the server, server processes it, and then server finally outputs it. All right, so there's also one term here called cookie. Cookie, it's actually a website. I mean, like it's a text it's being stored in the website on your disk, on your local disk, actually. So whenever you're connecting to any server, web server, for for retrieving any web page, so some some information in this web page will be stored in your disk, even if you shut down that browser and went out or exited that web page. This kind of text actually it helps you to later on when you access the website again, it helps you to load the kind of information so rapid without the need to have a full communication and read the full information from the server side. So this will actually decreases this has an advantage of decreasing the amount of uploaded data from the server and even has a faster response time. So we call this cookie, but you need to ensure this actually some kind of security issues happen because we're allowing cookies to every website. So you need to be careful about this and only allow cookies from those kind of trusted websites. Common Gateway Interface, here it's a protocol that allows operating system to interact with the web server. So this kind of interface here, it's very critical. Why? It's because whenever whenever the user have an access to that protocol, it means that he's able to access that the entire operating system. So normally attackers actually like and prefer this kind of protocol. So if they were able to access this kind of protocol, so it means that they have an access to the entire operating system, and then they can trigger their malicious code on it and destroy the that operating system. All right, so common languages for GCI, here there are there are two or three to say. For example, Perl here, and it's actually the first popular language that it's used for servers. And we have C also, and we have shell script and C also. They are very popular to work with Linux, both of them. So these three, these three kind of programming languages, talking about the C, shell, and talking about C, shell, and also Perl, they are actually lack of security. So that's why it's not really recommended to use them. In all the applications of of developing web environments or web-based environments. We have JavaScript. We have Java server pages, JSP, and also ASP.NET. They of course have a more robust kind of functionalities and even more robust security considerations. That's why they are actually more powerful, much more preferred to be used by the by the end users to build the current and recent kind of websites. All right, so actually there are many under the hood when we talk about web-based environment. There are too much of them. Like we have ASP, we have ASP.NET. ASP actually it's we call it the old version of ASP.NET. ASP.NET it's the current version, and it has even more powerful and enhanced capabilities over the ASP. Both of them have been developed by Microsoft, okay, and you need to know that. So PHP here, it's a hypertext protocol. It is actually a popular language, and it's very robust kind of language that it's being used for web development, and even it provides a high level of user hierarchy. So that's why it's much popular to say when forums, kind of platforms are being developed. For example, Facebook in its beginning of the development, it was actually using PHP, and you can see how powerful is that. Why? It's because they want to have a multi-level of users who are actually accessing and have different functionalities to be distributed on them. Okay, so most likely when you talk about the structure of JSP, ASP, and PHP, it's actually more similar because all of them are actually called object-oriented. Okay, so forums here, using forums, there it is actually I mean, like it is a way of sending data between, I mean, like between different pages on the I mean, like on the website. So this kind of way we can like transfer user data, I mean, like, and we can send it from one web page to another by, I mean, like whenever we hit a button, any kind of button, so an action can be taken in order to transfer or read or maybe store data, I mean, like from one page to another. Okay. Okay. So as you can read here, it submits a button. I mean, like when submit button here is pressed, as you can see here. Let me just forward one slide. Then the data can be sent from, I mean, like can be sent into a file, or maybe can directly being loaded into another web page. Okay. So there's a question here, and this is a very important point you need to focus. How web browser is actually communicating with the server. Okay, so this is just a mechanism. I mean, like this is just a process, a small details in a process that actually translate this. So whenever the user is entering his data here and clicks submit, this is actually a form. I mean, like this is a design of a form that has been created using HTML. So first, I mean, like when clicking the submit, the browser links the data. I mean, like the browser links the text box names in form HTML with the data you have entered. Okay, and then each, such as, for example, this name here, Lane, Gwynny, and then even the other type of, I mean, like the other items that can be existing here, and it's sent to a file called, I mean, as designed as a file name here. So this is the script actually. This is the programming, how we actually creating them. Okay, so meaning that we are actually gathering these information. We are gathering whatever information that the user have entered, and we are actually passing them through the, I mean, like we are reading them through the form. Okay, so the browser sends the information to the web server, so then the web server processes it and then return the result. So the result here is just a displaying or reading this, I mean, like this file. So whatever file, I mean, like the information will be stored in whatever file name here and then sent to the server. The server fetches the file, reads the file, and then displays it. Okay, or maybe it doesn't need to, sometimes it doesn't need to read the file or like display the file to say it reads it, but maybe it's not displaying it, rather it stores it in a database. So okay, it depends actually on the it depends on the process, or it depends on the purpose, how the server is going to interact with this. Okay, so we can say here that not all forms process data by sending them to the web server, I mean, like as a part of the URL. Okay, so because you see in the, I mean, like as you can see here, so these information, if you notice here, they have been sent, I mean, the values here have been sent to the, I mean, like to the URL. So meaning that like whenever I click submit here, so this information will be taken and carried over the URL in order to be displayed in this web page. Okay, and this kind of style called get. All right, so this kind of function called get, we have two functions actually to send the information. We have get and post. So get is actually carrying the information on the URL, and this is actually, to be frank, this is actually not a secure form of processing information. Why? It is because whatever data that has been sent, it will be like clearly available. So imagine if you have your password here as an entry, as an entity, and you want to submit it, so it will be plain text. It will be sent as a plain text, so it will be easily to be cracked and to be spoofed by any kind of attackers there. So post here, it's more efficient and even more effective because it stores the name and the value pairs of the in a file, and then the file is sent back to the web server instead of sending the URL itself. So it has no size limitation. Here you need to focus about the size limitation. In the get, we can only store, or we can only transfer up to 2,000 characteristics, but here of course it depends on the size of the file. Okay, so this is actually is much more preferred, and even it will hide the information from, I mean, like from being shown in the URL. Okay, so to verify your programming language, Of course, you can create a comparable tests across the languages, but actually this is like not necessarily to be happen because I mean like nowadays most of the programming language they are actually very powerful, especially when you talk about JSP and ASP, PHP. Um, Actually, there's nothing much of comparison as to the end user to to run that, but maybe there are some users or some companies who are actually thinking of more deep details, maybe in terms of memory in terms of memory efficiency, in terms of, for example, huge data, or like parallel data transmissions or parallel data processing. In this case, yes, maybe these kind of languages, they may differ from each other. All right. So when you talk about like ASP here, so ASP actually handles the form in a specific way. So it uses this kind of brackets and an ampersand here for opening and closing tags here, as you can see here. So here, these data are actually being transmitted, these data being carried using this kind of form, as you notice here. So this is one way of retrieving data from the form by using bracket ampersand equal to request. This is actually a function, request meaning that to retrieve. So this is a function to retrieve data from the form, to read data from the form. Okay, so request here, for example, SSN, for example, and you can make it like request also salary here. So it is actually meaning that we are retrieving the value of that field that has been stored in that form just recently here. Okay, so code actually will not be much important. You will not be assist in the code. Rather, you need to know how in ASP, how can we retrieve data by using this kind of function. And for opening and closing tags, then we can use this kind of this kind of annotation here. ASP.NET is of course, one of the many languages that are available under .NET, and even as we have said just now, it is more powerful, and it's actually the advanced level or the advanced version over ASP. It is very superior compared to ASP, and these are the aspects, or actually to say some aspects that we can compare in which direction to say why ASP.NET or how ASP.NET is more superior comparing to ASP. It has actually more module. It has modules for data validation. It processed or produced a sophisticated report much easier than ASP. Caching, of course, it's very improved and very efficient. It allows codes to be executed over more than one browser, meaning that it can handle parallel processing. But the downside here of the limitation of ASP.NET is that it is increase of capabilities. It will equal to the increase of complexity. It means that the program will be highly complex. All right. So because it has a lot of capabilities in it, and it's difficult to learn, especially by those kind of naive users or like the beginner user to say, like ASP is kind of straightforward and easy to learn. So it's more difficult for programmers to write a code. To write a code that performs very specific tasks, because it actually hides the standard operations. Okay, so these three can be reckoned as the downside of the ASP.NET. You can refer actually to the textbook, for example. Like here in this page, page 334. For more details. This is actually how the form can be created using an ASP.NET. As I mentioned to you, I will not be asking you to write a code in any of your assessments, but I need you to get familiar of how this kind of database, how this kind of programming language is being scripted and is being written. All right, so coming into Linux here, Linux actually uses shell, or it uses CGI, as we have mentioned here. So it allows the language to compatible with the protocol. Allows any language compatible with the protocol, such as Perl and C and Shell, to be used and to be manipulated here. So the first line states here, as we can see, this is actually an example of shell programming, or like shell scripting to say. So this is to indicate that now the shell is active and it's being used. Okay, so by the way, so talking about shell here, it has one actually major limitation, that it's actually lack of security, because the information when it's being sent from the server, I mean, like from the client to the server, and the way opposite, they are not being encrypted at all. So although we are talking about Linux here, but I mean, like talking about shell in particular, it is not really preferred to be used. So currently there are actually more enhancements in order to make an encryption certificates. I mean, like over these, over these scripts, over the shell scripting in order to, I mean, like to encrypt it to be more secure. Microsoft uses two methods here to bring, I mean, like to bridge the gap between the programming language and database. There is one point here. You need to know and you need to put this in your mind. So whenever we are writing using any programming language, could be like, for example, PHP or ASP, and we are linking to a database, this actually doesn't mean that we are directly linking to the database. What actually happened here is that, I mean, like within the operating system, actually, it's not going to be appear to us. Within the operating system, there is one middleware here. It is called, I mean, like it is called kind of a linkage to link whatever, I mean, like to link whatever, processes or like whatever commands that can be written in the programming language with the queries and with the, I mean, like functions in the database. So there's actually one standard here called open database or open database connectivity to say here. I have been actually, yeah, it seems that this slide is duplicating here. But anyway, I will just go through it because we have been modifying here a little bit. All right, so open database connectivity here, it's actually a programming language. It's like an intermediate, or it's like a middleware that it has been used by Microsoft in order to link between database management system and programming language. So programming language can then be incorporated commands to use, I mean, to connect the ODCP, ODBC. The other one here, it's also, I mean, like another variation of the open database connectivity. It is object linking and embedding database. It's actually very similar to the first one, but it's a current standard. It's even more faster and flexible. It has more enhancement over the ODBC. Okay, both of these standards are being used by Microsoft, and they can provide a simple way to connect to database. All right, so again here, let's just mention this again. So this is just like a definition, either ODBC or the OLEDB. So both of them are actually middleware that connect or link programming language in a unified way. This is very important. This is the key word here. So we are actually seeking to have one way in order to connect to different database. Doesn't matter what kind of database we are linking to. Could be Oracle, could be MySQL, could be Access, could be SQL. So we are actually, our aim here, I mean, like the main aim of this kind of entity is to find a way in order for the programming language, if it is compatible, any kind of programming language, could be PHP, if it is compatible with the ODBS, then it can link to whatever database. So here the linking here by initiating commands to ODBS, and then if the commands here are being recognized from that particular language, then it actually this entity should be linked to the database, and the linkage here between the ODBS and the database should be by having the drivers of database to be defined here. So this one is like the orchestrator, or like it's the central entity that actually manages the connections between the programming and the database. So Linux here often uses Java database connectivity. It's very similar to the ODBC and even its variant that we have discussed just now. So in Windows, both JDBC and ODBC bridge to allow the Java programs in order to access the current database management systems. So here the limitations of these kind of middlewares, doesn't matter whether the ODBC or the JDBC, is that they are actually adding more extra, an extra layer of software between the database and the programming language. And this actually will decreases the performance and also increases the complexity in the same way. Because like if you're targeting like more parallel and thousands of processes to be issued and triggered in the same time, of course you will face, this may render, this may hinder the, the performance level. Some database also products are designed for a specific programming environment. So this kind of standardization make these I mean, like make these kind of, I mean, make this objective here or aim cannot be realized, because in this case we cannot actually um, design a database for a specific programming environment that cannot be exposed to the standardization that we are using here. Okay, so connecting to the database or programming language, connecting, I mean, like this is how to produce here. These are the steps on how to produce a report over ASP. There are actually many steps. I mean, like there are several steps here. You can refer to the, I mean, like to the pages here in order to get the more explanations and to get that full kind of details. So first of all, it's about connecting database, meaning that linking the programming to the database, and then we execute the SQL select statement, I mean, like to select the whole table or the whole database, and then we put the data in the record, meaning that retrieving, I mean, like the data to be stored in a record set. This is kind of a file, okay? So also known also as a result set, depending on the environment. And then finally, we loop through the record set and display whatever content, because we want to make all the data to be ready and available. All right, so it differs from like one programming language to another. So here we are talking about ASP. How is it handling this? Later on, we'll also talk about like ASP.NET and also PHP. I mean, like this. I mean, like the way is almost similar, but like it's just a matter of syntaxes. It's a matter of like how each programming language uses its own syntaxes to initiate and trigger these commands to be linked. All right, so this is the ASP example in order to I mean, like to fulfill these steps here. So in the first level here, or in the first stage, so it's creating a connection using object con. So there's here an object called con. Okay, so we are creating a connection here. All right, so and then this is also we open the connection to employee database, so meaning that we are linking whatever database we want. So here database could be HR or employee. Okay, here also the SQL statement that retrieves all the data in the table is called employee here. So we are actually executing. We want to select SSN. These are the different columns that we are selecting, the different items we are selecting in the database. So we want to select the column SSN, first name, last name, salary, and also from where. This is from that database name, database employee. So loop, here we are looping in order to be able to retrieve all these kind of data, and then moves the employee record. Here finally we are actually moving the employee record, I mean as a final step in order to be able to process and work on and even modify if we want on that kind of data. Okay. All right, so using data source name, DSN, not DNS. I don't want you to confuse with this. This is a DSN, and DNS is another term. It's totally different. Okay, so it is another way of connection to database that actually an administrator creates on a server. So instead of having forms or report, so we can make a connection using the data source names. So what are the features of like this kind of concept to say? So it is actually being processed, or it's being implemented by encapsulating the information on the previous slide, as we have seen here. It's about encapsulating these information of the connection, and then allow changing the configuration without forcing the programmer to change the ASP code. Okay, so meaning that we do not have more changes here. We do not require more changes in the code in order to change the value of the data. So DSN also provided detailed information about the database, such as the IP address, the DBMS server, and also other details. So the data source wizard is in the control panel of the DNS. So also here it actually it uses, or it makes use of that kind of standardized in order to link or to bring the linkage here. So once it's created, then you can create the connection. You can create the connection actually with the database. It should be configured. Actually to connect that database here. So this is like an example of how we can make that connection here. I just want you to to focus on what are the different aspects, or like the different items of implementing the DSN over implementing the this kind of I mean like this kind of report. I mean like implementing a report using an ASP. All right, so talking about ASP.NET, of course, as we have discussed before, there's nothing much more to talk about ASP.NET because, like, more details you can reach them from the textbook. All you need to know is that it actually has a similar way as the ASP to connect the database. Okay, and it actually produces reports in more easier way. This is actually the more, I mean, like the advantage over the ASP. So PHP also is also Apache is also available in the Apache server, and it's very easy and handy to be used in an Apache installation. So you don't need to configure too much on the PHP. Some Apache servers server applications they have actually a combination between Apache, PHP language, and also MySQL that you don't need to install any single language. I mean, like you don't need to install any single software but after installing that particular package. Okay. This is actually an example with ASP.NET how to connect. So here we need to use what we call data grid. Okay. So although there's a connection that has been created here, but we still need to use the data grid here. This is in order to create, in order to create the report and retrieve that kind of data from the database. Of course, all these codes are not actually required from you to, I mean, like to implement, but it's okay. It's of course up to you if you want to go through it. I mean, like if you want to, I mean, like to open up the, I mean, like more details and be able to manipulate this, you can just do so. But my concern here it is about how ASP is being manipulated. But we will not be of course practicing about like how to write an ASP.NET code because you're supposed to know this, or like you can actually improve your skills on how to implement this. Talking about PHP, which is even more easier than the ASP.NET here, and it's even very clear here. As you can see, these are the connection details, and this is the loop that we are using. So first, we have actually an object here that it's actually to select a database that it's called HR. So this is the database name. And here, first of all, we connect using the localhost, using the username and the password. The username is root here, and the password is password. Okay, and this is the, I mean, like what kind of data we want to. Again, it's very similar. If you see here, it is very similar to I mean, like the data that we are retrieving. So it is just a matter of syntax changes here, as you can see. So we are selecting whatever columns here in the database, and then we are looping over that, I mean, the database in order to retrieve them, in order to read them and display them. All right. So with that, this is the end of the chapter, and I hope you really understand, like these concepts that we were discussing about. It is more actually about like about databases and programming, and to be, I mean, like to say this clearly again, there is a high relevance and there is a high relation between whatever dynamic programming language, web programming language, and the database. So that whenever we discuss any of them, of course, we need to mention about the other, meaning that talking about databases and MySQL, of course, it has to have some details to be mentioned in its variant or its used programming language. So as you can see, we have different programming language here: ASP.NET, JSP, PHP, and each of them it has its own features and limitation, its own features and also some limitations that can be imposed. Okay, and we don't need to forget that PHP it is being used in Apache server, and Apache server is the main web server that is being used and that it's being developed for Linux systems, while the rest like IIS, which is functioning the ASP.NET and JSP, the ASP.NET and the ASP itself, it actually works in Microsoft. And we have MySQL also. It's a kind of a database that it's being used in Apache and even in currently in Windows, but originally actually it's being used in Apache. All right. So also we have what we call ODBC and OLEDB. Here there are kind of a standards to bring, to act as a middleware, to be as a middleware to link between the programming language and the database, how to connect through them. Well, thank you for that, and I hope this has been informative for you, and we will see you again in another explanation. Thank you.